See, what I'm going to do is basically present a commentary on my paper, which began as an abstract and developed into a commentary, which eschews quoting from the paper extensio and also avoiding Marathi language texts, which I thought would be inappropriate to Aligarh, where I assume very few people know Marathi in any case. So what my paper actually does is to highlight the conversations between imagined selves and others present in selected pre-colonial Marathi sources. And I have done that with respect to the Marathi sources produced by Maratha scribes of the 18th century in the period known as the Panipat period of Maratha history, which is a very important period in nationalist historiography as well as other kinds of, and communal historiography as well. What these conversations tell us, that they were situated outside the reference to Europe, and to borrow a term from Sabyasachi Bhattacharya's analysis of colonial historiography, colonialist history per se. The Maratha warrior administrators continuously reflected on the binary of the self and the other in a time impossible to square with modern idealized histories. The paper is based on a critical reading of some Bakhars, Thailis, letters and the odd Atma Charitra, typically the Atma Charitra written by Nana Fadnavis himself. It concludes that Maratha history can be rescued both from colonialist and nationalist historiography by revisiting its primary sources. Another history, neither colonialist nor nationalist, thus becomes possible in our strife-ridden contemporary times. European historians see the 16th century Renaissance as the starting point in the making of the modern European self. This self ultimately developed in binary opposition to the other, which was imagined and constructed to serve imperial and colonial interests in Africa, America, and Asia. The consequences of this process are too well known to everyone present here to be recounted in detail. The intellectual process, in fact, the civilizational episteme of the modern state and later the nation state, engendered by this othering of non-European people, ultimately became the context of the conflict between colonialism and decolonization in modern and contemporary history. The colonial denial of history to the colonized subject and the colonized subjects talking back, again to use a phrase which comes from my Professor Sabyasachi Bhattacharya's new book, latest book on how the Indian intellectual talked back to the colonizer in the 19th century. Talking back, to use the late Sabyasachi Bhattacharya's phrase, to this denial of history framed the context within which history as a modern discipline developed in all colonies during the 19th century. Eurocentric history initially guided this process from the beginning as ideology and discipline. In India, this was evident in the histories of an entire civilization written by colonialist historians from James Mill onwards. With the rise of the humanities to professional prominence after the industrial and the French revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries, Eurocentric history became universal history in the service of Western global dominance. Eurocentric history was exported to the institutions and societies of the colonies and was reproduced by the culturally colonized elites educated in educational institutions established by colonial rule. Another ideological development which spread from Europe to the colonies in the 19th century was nationalism. Nationalism impressed history as a set of binaries on the mind of the native nationalist insurgent, creating imagined nations in the same way as they had been created in Europe in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars. These binaries were of culture, language, and religion, which in India's case have proven socially and politically damaging in the long run. On the one hand, nationalism negated the cultural inferiority induced in the colonial subject by colonial education and racial discrimination. On the other, its reclamation of historical superiority and masculinity was underlined by the psychological inferiority and social anxieties produced in the mind of the colonial subject by colonialism itself. In these colonial circumstances, modern history was established as a discipline and often became what I call a psychological trap for the Europeanized native in the conflict between nationalism and colonialism and other nationalisms. So once you start the process of discovering nationalisms in your history, it is not very, it doesn't take you very long to start discovering other nationalisms as well. The acceptance of the colonial framework of historiography meant that nationalist history writing in India was destined to falter at the threshold of communal politics. Consequently, the hallucinations of the past produced by competing nationalisms made history an argument between hardened contemporary antagonistic identities. At the same time, colonialism and missionary education opened service opportunities to the lower castes whose search for a past conflicted with both nationalist and communal historiography. After colonialism, nationalist history was made pedagogically integral to the social identities fashioned by elite politics in independent India. In contrast, my paper presents a nuanced conversation between the self and the other in pre-colonial India, present in selected Marathi sources, many of which have been routinely used by the so-called Maratha history writing historians to portray medieval Maharashtra, a contested term itself, as a site of ceaseless religious conflict between Hindu freedom fighters and Muslim imperialist tyrants. A large body of post-colonial historiography in India has problematized the terms Hindu and Muslim to the detriment of communal historiography. Further, the rise of the Dalit Bahujan historiography inspired by the works of Phule, Ambedkar and Periyar has queered the pitch for the nationalists and the communalists. The Marathi texts of the 18th century on which this paper is based comprise an important part of the corpus archived in the Peshwa Daftar and the various repositories of present-day Maharashtra. They have been perceived as the so-called primary sources of Maratha history by modern historians since the 19th century, a century when modern history writing in India evolved as a discipline, as a profession, and as a university-taught subject. The conversations reported in this paper took place between individuals or groups of people situated outside the reference to Europe, which I think is a very, very crucial element of historiographical change which took place in India in the 19th century. Most Indian texts before the 19th century do not take Europe as a reference point. There's an epistemological break in the way texts refer to time and space after the onset of English historiography and colonial historiography in the 19th century and the times before that. I think as historians we have to pay specific attention to this temporal and spatial nature of the sources. These sources remind us of the culturally constructed, anxious self emanating from the experiences of mobile men produced in early modern Europe, documented by scholars like Stephen Greenblatt. It is not as if there were no anxieties in pre-colonial India. It is not as if notions of the self and the other were not present in pre-colonial India. But the point is to see the different ways in which these concepts, these identities, these notions of the self and the other are problematized. They are problematized very differently in pre-colonialist sources. And that's where the rub is, That's why we need to go back to these sources again and again to see whether we can excavate a history which is at loggerheads with the sort of historical nonsense we are being taught day in and day out nowadays in this country. It is a well-established fact that individual and social mobility creates anxiety in the traveler subject of history. All travelers who move, either socially, culturally, or geographically, experience this problem of anxiety, of changing location in time and space. This paper examines the Marathas of the 18th century as one of the several groups of mobile men in Indian history. Others have been examined by scholars like William R. Pinch, whose book, The Warrior Ascetics and Indian Empires, can be called a classic in the context of understanding fluid identities in medieval India. By critically engaging with the conversations of these men about the self and the other, my paper bears their anxieties in alien lands and the means they possessed of addressing them. The aim of this paper is not to construct a secular past sans conflict. Its objective is to demonstrate that men and women drew varied lessons from the conflict between the self and the other in a time difficult to square with the idealized historical identities imagined in our age of religious strife and persecutions. The paper asserts that in alien lands, the Maratha quotidian experiences was marked by the tension between the desire to emulate the Rajputs and Afghans and the reassertion of Maratha culture, sometimes even by the Maratha women present in the Maratha camps. This is evident in the dialogues between Bhagirathi Bai and Dattaji Shinde, reported in the Bhau Sahib and Shibakhar, only to mention one instance. At places, the sane advice of the veteran commander Naro Shankar is highlighted to place before the reader of the source the choices available to the actors in the story of the Panipat campaign. In one such piece of advice, narrated as the legend of the birth of Shujauddaulah, piety is delinked completely from religion. Mansur Ali, as Safdarjung was called by the Marathas, emerges from this conversation as a pious man, a true Musliman. It was also suffused by a continuous reference to the Desh beyond the Narmada. The word Maharashtra does not appear in these sources. The word Maharashtra is not used by the Bhau Sahib and Shibakhar. The word Maharashtra is not used in the Panipat Shibakhar. The word Maharashtra is not used in Bhau Sahib and Kaifiyat. The word Maharashtra is not used in the copious letters written by Antaji Mankeshwar, the commander of Delhi. The word used is Desh. And this Desh has to be problematized by the historian to understand what the Maharashtrians referred to in North India. It's very surprising. We are told all the time that Sant Ramdas told Shivaji, Marathi Tituka Milwawa, Maharashtra Dharam Vadwawa, which basically means bring all the Marathi speaking people together and spread Maharashtra Dharma. This is the Brahminical version of Shivaji. This all gets conflicted in the way Pansare wrote that book, Who is Shivaji? Shivaji Kaun Hota Hai? So on. So, the Desh beyond the Narmada as distinct from the ideological Maharashtra of the 19th century, from where the Marathi speakers came and to which they could retreat and retire without shame. If too many troubles threatened you in the north, you could go back to the Desh. And there was no shame, unlike the shame attached to retreat in the Rajput sources, which Bahuguna was talking about. In the Marathi sources, there is equivocation on these things. Holkar feels no shame. In Holkaranchi Thaili, he tells Sadashiv Rao Bhav. He says, अगर पेशवा के सामने जाने में शर्म आ रही है, मुंह नहीं दिखाना चाहते हो, तो हम लोग यहां से वापस चले जाते हैं नर्मदा के किनारे, 2-4 महीने रहते हैं, रिप्लेनिश करते हैं, घोड़े वगैरह कमजोर हो गए उनको मजबूत करते हैं, उसके बाद जब अफगान वापस चला जाएगा तो फिर चले आएंगे. शर्म करने की बात नहीं है. एंड ही यूजेस द वर्ड, ही सेज, ये सब करने से तुम इतिहास में गांडू नहीं बोले जाओगे. He uses the word. तुम्ही गांडू होना नहीं. Very clear. So there is no shame. You can go back to the Desh. Antarji Mankeshwar writes letters after letters. He says, XYZ came to the north, went for a pilgrimage, then he went back to the Desh. The accounts have to be settled there. Desh was a place where you went back to settle your accounts. Desh was where you came from, and Desh beyond the Narmada was where you went. It is not Maharashtra. It is not mentioned as Maharashtra. The word Maharashtra itself has to be problematized in the context of colonialist and nationalist historiography. And I am talking about mid-18th century, which is almost 100 years after the Swaraj of Shivaji. If Maharashtra was so firmly embedded as a nationalist construct in the mind of the Maharashtrian, I would suppose that the word Maharashtra would be repeated again and again in these sources, but it is not. It is not even mentioned once. The word mentioned is Desh. It's a very interesting word, Desh. It speaks of a kind of patriotism, but not nationalism. The Marathas, on the other hand, were also not averse to accepting what the sources call the Code of Hindustan, which is a different code from that of the Marathas, and thereby making profitable and convenient strategic choices in an alien milieu. In this society of fluid identities, a powerful Maratha Sardar like Malhar Raoji Holkar, who became a Maratha after being at Tangar, he rose from the ranks. He had Tangar origins. He was of the shepherd caste. What we called, in Maharashtra we call them, Medpal, Menda, sheep keepers, shepherds. And he became a very famous Malhar Raoji Holkar, the one who established Indore, father-in-law of Ahilya Boy Holkar. So Maratha Sardar like Malhar Raoji Holkar took an oath to extirpate the race of the Jats upon losing his drunkard son at the siege of Kumbher in 1754, and did not think twice before helping Surajmal escape from Delhi and the watch of Sadashiv Rao Bhau in 1761. Holkar warred against the North Indians ceaselessly, especially against the Rajputs. One of the reasons why the Rajputs became so irritated with the Marathas. Yet found among them sons. He was very famous for finding sons, like Najib Khan Rohilla, with whom he was very close. And Najib Khan Rohilla was considered a sworn enemy of the Marathas in these texts. Najib Khan wanted to extirpate the influence of Marathas in the north. He was instrumental in inviting Ahmad Shah Abdali in 1759 to settle the scores with the Marathas who were exercising hegemony in the north at that time. The sources also tell us, interestingly, about the attempts made by Ahmad Shah Abdali to subvert the loyalty of another Durrani adventurer, the French-trained Ibrahim Khan Gardi, only to be rebuffed several times. There are passages in the Bhau Sahibanchi Kaifiyat, there are passages in Bhau Sahibanchi Bakhar, in which, and also in Holkaranchi Theli, in which just on the eve of the battle, when Sadashiv Rao Bhau tells some of his Sardars to take their families and their friends and go back to the Deccan from the battlefield, and when Ibrahim Khan sees him dithering before the battle, it is Ibrahim Khan who flourishes more than 25 letters from his pocket and tells Sadashiv Rao and Holkar, these are the letters which I have received regularly from the Afghans, trying to subvert my loyalty to Bhau, to whom I have sworn loyalty. And at this hour, when battle is about to be joined, you are talking of deserting me? And the letters are then said to have the following content, that you are a Durrani. If you join me, we will give you jagirs, we will give you lands. You are of the same race as me. Come over to our side. Because they knew that the entire Topkhana was under the control of Ibrahim Khan Gardi. And the most well-trained and disciplined troops, the Telinga troops, were being commanded by him. Troops which could have done the greatest amount of damage to the Indo-Afghan forces at the Battle of Panipat. And they had seen how they had performed in Kunjpura in September-October 1760. So they come back, come to us. But then Durrani rebuffs Abdali. The Marathi sources speak of the possibility of avoiding the battle by a resort to negotiation, something which nationalist history does not tell you. A Sandani Sawar was sent. Sandani Sawar is a dromedary rider. Sandani is Marathi for a female camel. He arrives with a letter of negotiation. Even before that, in December 1760, as Holkar says in his Holkaranchi Theli, त्यांनी तुमच्याशी कितीदा सुलूक केला तुम्ही केला नाही. Abdali wanted to negotiate with you many times, but you said no, because विनाश काले विपरीत बुद्धि झाली होती तुमची. तुम्हारा दिमाग खराब हो गया था. All these riches and power had gone to your head. You had become swollen headed. You thought you will be able to fight Abdali in a pitched battle. And when Abdali sent before the battle, almost a month before the battle, a negotiator was sent. They said, you decide terms. Even we want to go back to Afghanistan, you want to go back to the Deccan. We are now both locked on the road to Delhi. We have lost thousands of men. You have also lost a large number of men and animals. We can avoid this battle. Set the terms. And Bhau asked for 7 crore rupees. He says, Kiti apar kharcha zala. We have come from such a long place. कितने जानवर मर गए, कितने लोगों को लेकर हम आए. 7 कोटी रुपया खर्च झाला. 7 crores have been spent. ते तुम्ही आम्हा द्या आणि आम्ही देशाला चाललो. You give us 7 crore rupees and I will go back to Maharashtra or to Desh, because he had to take the money and show to the Peshwa his face that he had been made the commander, de facto commander of the army, to bring back money from North India. Money which the Marathas would have lost had they lost political control over North India following the death of Dattaji Shinde at the Battle of Buradi in January 1760. But that did not happen. You did not do the suluk because power had gone to your head. So this is the way the sources, because I remember the sources, I'm just quoting from them. The offer made by Abdali and Najib and the arrogant answer of the Bhau is highlighted by sources clearly written from a non-Brahmin and even an anti-Brahmin perspective in the 18th century. So while Bhau talks about not being able to show his face to the Peshwa, this is Nana Sahib kya mudya? Nana Sahib is Peshwa Balaji Bajirao, not the Nana Sahib. Don't confuse that Nana Sahib with the Nana Sahib of 1857. He says, Nana Sahib को मैं क्या मुंह दिखाऊंगा? उनको मैं मुंह नहीं दिखा सकता. क्या मुंह लेके वापस जाऊंगा? I had come to reassert the prestige of the Marathas in the north. If I go back without a victory or without money, what face will I show? Money is very important. Money, they were all doing it for money because they had to finance their armies. It was the time of military fiscalism and so on. While he refers to Nana Sahib, Peshwa, who is his immediate senior, and also his cousin, that's why he's called Sadashirao, Bhau. Bhau was Chimaji Appa's son. In Holkaranji Thaili, he says, Holkar says very clearly, Yash prapt karna hai, we have to fight, we have to survive. मुल्क डुबोने का कोई फायदा नहीं है. हिंदू हो या मुसलमान हो, छत्रपति की इज्जत बरकरार रहनी चाहिए. Even in terms of the references to sovereignty, Holkar is referring to the Chhatrapati and Sadashiv Rao Bhau is referring to the Peshwa. So there are divergences in interpretations and explanations in practically every part of the source. Therefore, what I suggest is that the Marathi sources of the 18th century are polyphonic and offer much between the lines to the critical scholar. Suffice to say that they describe a world where men and women were different from us and therefore often did things differently. These people had a notion of time and space which cannot be reconciled with the imaginations produced by the historicization of the Indian mind in the 19th century. Thank you very much. So there are divergences in interpretations and explanations in practically every part of the source. Therefore, what I suggest is that the Marathi sources of the 18th century are polyphonic and offer much between the lines to the critical scholar. Suffice to say that they describe a world where men and women were different from us and therefore often did things differently. These people had a notion of time and space which cannot be reconciled with the imaginations produced by the historicization of the Indian mind in the 19th century. Thank you very much.
And as he said at the conclusion, a critical study of sources will give you, diverse answers. And
with the students who are here, I think this is an inspiration to them. Any questions which you may like to put to Mr. Deshpande?
Before. Because the Marathas for the first time appeared in North India in 1717, I remember. When Balaji Vishnath, with the help of Hussain Ali Khan, came and stayed in Delhi, and after some scuffle, thousands of Marathas were massacred, and they had to rush back to Maratha. Does the course say, like the way you have mentioned, all those courses we are depicting the 1761 event, do you find any depiction or portrayal of this defeat of the Maratha in 1717 itself, because they had to rush back. Thousands were killed in Delhi itself in 1717. That was the first instance when the Maratha were at the heart of Delhi, at the heart.
This incident is not mentioned at all in any source. In fact, there's a big difference in the way we recount the history of the 18th century and the way the 18th century sources recount the history of their own time. They don't refer to such massacres at all. All they say is, stage by stage the Maratha armies used to march north, exacting tribute from every kingdom they would come across, including Bundelkhand or Gujarat or Rajputana and so on and so forth. They talk about Raghunath Rao, they talk about these are Maratha sources. My paper is based on sources produced about events from 1750 to 1761. And if this riposte of 1717, to which you have referred in your question, was available in the minds of the scribes who were writing this, or the characters they were depicting, it is not mentioned at all. Not at all. In fact, these sources don't even refer to Shivaji even once. The name of Shivaji is not there in these sources. Neither is the word Swaraj in these sources. Nor is the word Hindu Padbadshahi in these sources. And I have read these sources several times. I now have a full paper on these sources which I have given to Nadeem. These terms which became the stock in trade terms of Maratha history in the 19th, especially from the late 19th century onwards, these terms are missing from these sources completely. And this is an event which is central to the construction of nationalist historiography in India, the third battle of Panipat, which is shown to be this great contest between Hindus and Muslims. Nothing could be further from the truth, in fact.
But the coronation of Shivaji in 1674, there are a lot of
See, much of the mythology of the coronation of Shivaji appears in the Bakhar literatures of the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, which were developed later. And much of it actually is a product of Maratha historiography, which was developed in the 1920s and 30s under rising communalism. Not only that, Marathi films and Marathi kadambaris, basically Marathi literature, Marathi novel writing, the historical novel became a very important genre of disseminating historical knowledge amongst the Marathi people from the 19th century onward. Kadambari is called, novel is called Kadambari in the Marathi language. In fact, this creates the episteme within which that popular image of the coronation and so on, all those things are mentioned. As you know very well, the Brahmins in Maharashtra had refused to consecrate Shivaji. So Gaga Bhatt was given the task of bringing Brahmins all the way from Banaras. And Gaga Bhatt, who was basically a Paithani Brahman, had stayed in the north for a very long time. He had contacts. So he got the North Indian Brahmins who came in, who consecrated Shivaji, because Shivaji was, see, the coronation ceremony lasted several days, and you have a very good account left by that Englishman who was invited. That's one of the first-hand records of the coronation Shivaji. Shivaji had to undergo a Janayu Sanskar. First he became a Dvija, after which he could become the king. Because the Brahmins of Maharashtra used to consider him a Shudra Raja. Something which is turned upside down in the historiography promoted by Jyotirao Phule, when he talks about Shivaji as a popular king. Similarly, that's the sort of question which is raised by Govind Pansare in his book, Shivaji Kaun Hota? Who is Shivaji? But unfortunately, your media, your mass media, your television, your cinema and your novels are so suffused with these mythologies that it's becoming impossible to talk rationally about these things in any forum without the risk of being assaulted and beaten up nowadays. I can say these things in Aligarh, but I wouldn't have been able to say these things in Pune had the Indian History Congress taken place there.
I think, enlightening paper. Because Maratha historiography, when we read Sir Desai's work, is full of such descriptions that Peshwa was not eating meat, but the third Peshwa started eating meat. This sort of things are there, and I think he didn't deliberately use the sources which you are describing. Because when we read Persian historiography about Marathas, we find that they are never referred as Hindu, rather sometimes they are referred as robbers. Because they are extorting money in the form of Sardeshmukhi and Chauth, which was very difficult for people to pay, and that's why we heard in the earlier paper that people of Rajasthan, they created image of Maharana Pratap because he was a savior, because the Marathas were extorting money from Rajput Rajas also, and there is a story, actually story, that one of the Raja who was unable to pay the money, he asked that a cobra should be left in my room so that I am died by the morning, Marathas will come and insult me because I am unable to pay. That was the situation there. And you have rightly pointed out that Marathas, they were looking for mainly Chauth and Sardeshmukhi, and these ideas of Hindu Padpadshahi are also not found neither in Persian sources nor in the Marathi sources. Rather, they are sometimes referring to Chhatrapati Shahu, at the same time to Peshwa also, and that kind of caste conflict is also there, because Marathas are never accepted as Kshatriyas. They are always of peasant origin in the eyes of the Brahmins, and that's why leadership goes to Peshwa. And I wanted to refer one more aspect. Yes, I am very excited about the letters of Ibrahim Gardi. Are the letters there?
No, these are that the emissaries of Ahmad Shah Abdali used to regularly send letters to him,
Yes.
trying to subvert. He refused that.
That's right. Persian sources do say that there were lot of negotiations, and war was ultimately taken because Marathas had no option but to fight. There was nothing to eat also. Even the horses, were dying very fast. But one more human aspect to whole discussion is this, which I read in Persian sources, because Bhau was the only son of Peshwa. Am I correct? Correct.
No, Bhau was not the son. He was Bhau was the cousin.
The other one, the other leader. What is the name? Vishwasrao and another one?
Vishwasrao.
One is the only son of Peshwa.
No, he had three sons. Vishwasrao,
But his son. One of them is son who dies in the battle.
Vishwasrao.
Yes.
He was the dean.
So when he dies and Peshwa doesn't know, because the means of communication were very old at that time.
Would you cut short yours?
So when Peshwa came to know, we hear it from, or I read it from Persian sources, Peshwa becomes mad because the son died. But on the death of son, Peshwa was being sent a dress of mourning by Ahmad Shah Abdali before leaving for Afghanistan. So those aspects are also there, and I agree with you that these are later interpolations.
On in the north, the Peshwa was looking for a very young girl to marry because he was unwell, and it used to be believed that if you marry a very young girl, you restore your virility and so on and so forth. So that's a different story of the Peshwas. But I will just illustrate the sanctity of the Mughal Empire, which goes against this notion of Hindu Padpadshahi. The reason why, which became an excuse for Suraj Jat to actually loot Delhi and go back quickly and not go further north with the Marathas. You see, the Takht, Mughal Takht used to have a silver canopy on top of it. And this canopy was intact when the Marathas came to Delhi, and Sadashiv Rao Bhau had no money to mint coins to pay his soldiers. And his eyes fell on the Takht, and he was unaccustomed to the customs of the north. So Suraj Jat says, you take whatever money I have got, leave this Takht alone, this canopy alone, this chhatri. Because even Nadir Shah did not touch this chhatri. He says that. When he came to the north, even Nadir Shah did not touch this chhatri. You do it. I mean, it's not that expensive. So then Bhau thought that this fellow is trying to dissuade me from taking the chhatri, because most probably he wants the chhatri for himself, and there's a lot of money in this. So he got the chhatri broken down, and he says, from there, they say, the sources say, Vinash Kale Viprit Buddhi started, that he started desecrating the most important symbols of the Mughal sovereignty and royalty. Because time and again the Maratha sources say, our job is to keep the Mughal Empire intact. We are the Subedars of the Mughal Empire. Our job is not to overturn the Mughal Empire.
I think silver coins were minted out.
They were minted and then he got only 2.5 lakhs or something.